Welcome back to the official Beast Lab. Today's guest is Mike Stella. Mike is one of the best physical therapists in Long Island. He was a former face-off man at Marist when he played in college. Now he is the owner of the Movement Underground. Not only does he work on athletes, he works on bodybuilders, but he also runs a very successful podcast, the Movement Underground podcast. I want to welcome today to my man, Mike Stella. All right, brother. Hey, man, welcome. I tell everybody that I talk to about you.
I appreciate that, bro.
Especially now that I have a second kid. I tell everybody, yeah, the first kid screwed my back up so bad that I had to go to Mike in order to play my final year of lacrosse. And now I'm getting those. I might be back in at some point because this whole carrying the baby for 3 hours thing is not what I'm built for.
I love how you go to it's the baby and not the 2 decades of running your body like a car in a destruction derby. But okay.
Yeah, well, I tell people, yeah, like compared compared to having kids, face-offs are easy.
Right, because at least face-offs you can still sleep at night. You know,
Yeah,
guess. Not that I
exactly.
don't have kids yet, so I don't know the pain. But I feel like all the athletes that I do work with that are parents, that seems to be the trigger is the sleep part of the equation.
Well, I see, guys that are playing in the league right now. They're like 23 years old, and they're like, here's my lifting, and I'm getting my workouts in. I'm like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to be doing when you're 23 years old. You don't have kids, you're not married, you don't have shit to do. You better be in shape. But yeah, I wanted to bring you on here because part of the official Beast Lab, what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring professionals from all corners of the physical world to one place for athletes to digest so you guys can demonstrate your knowledge. You have such an incredible background that makes you so good, especially for lacrosse players, and I can say that from experience. Not only have you played the sport, you've played the face-off position, but you're an actual real student of the physical body. I remember when you would work on me, you wouldn't just do things or just say, here's your issue and here's like 3 sets of 12 that you have to go do in the corner. You would work on me and you would explain exactly what was happening and why throughout the entire thing. And it was like taking a master class in kinesiology while you were working on me. Let's go back to what got you into physical therapy in the very first place.
Man, it's a really good question. And it hits home for me because, I was that guy, man. I was that injured athlete that never lived up to the hype or the potential that people had set for me. And so, just first thing real quick, I'm an athletic trainer by trade, not a physical therapist. And there is a distinction. So I try not to misrepresent myself, but again, athletic trainers, sports medicine, I've been doing it for the last 15 years and really, the genesis or how I got into this was, like any other high school kid, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life at that time. And all I knew is that I played lacrosse. I was pretty good at it. People come around your town and your school, man, you're so good. You're so good. You're going to go D1. And like, you start like, oh shit. Like, yeah, man, I'm pretty freaking good at this. And, you start believing in your own hype kind of, and it's hard when you're 18, 19, like you don't really see the big picture yet. And so, I was, again, a pretty highly recruited lacrosse player. Not that I was the most skilled guy on the field, but I was a really good athlete. I was running at the time in high school, I was running like a 4.6 40, so I could move up and down the field really well. And I kind of embraced like the blue collar aspects of lacrosse, which is pick up ground balls, clear, ride like a mofo, face off, set my teammates up for success. And that was a really good formula for me. And then my senior year of high school, I was torn on where to go. Didn't know where I wanted to play. I had a few offers and I ended up blowing out my knee, right? So complex knee blowout, ACL, PCL, MCL, meniscus, tibial plateau fracture. I think the official diagnosis was fucked.
Yeah.
And so, right. And I, went through the surgery, went through the rehab process, and I just was never the same guy. And I did everything everybody told me to do to like the nth degree. And I just couldn't get my body back. And this was at a pivotal time where I was transitioning from the high school game to the college game. Everybody on the team is a lot better. And all of a sudden there's dudes that, matching your speed or faster. And like my whole world got kind of spun upside down. And for me, I started really having a lot of confidence issues, right? Like, am I good enough to play at this level? Can I contribute to this team in a meaningful way? Am I ever going to overcome this knee issue? And, I made a lot of mistakes. I I believed a lot of what, again, I trusted in my doctors and my therapy, but, at that time it was the very standard procedure for rehab. And I wasn't ever evaluated as an athlete. I was just kind of thrown into the standard operating procedure and kind of did okay, I guess, but I was just not the same guy. I didn't have the confidence on that knee. So it really changed the whole way I played the game, which wasn't in a good way. And so I kind of went on like a personal journey, I guess, to, I switched my major to sports medicine. So Marist College was the last D1 to give me a shot to play, and they happen to have a sports medicine program. And so I guess it worked out in that way. And I just became obsessed with why. I became obsessed with why, if I've been rehabilitated, am I not able to achieve my prior level of performance or beyond that? And it was like a personal thing. Like I was doing it for me, and I spent my entire 20s really researching and taking courses and trying to find the answer for me. And what I didn't realize I was doing was building something that I could actually help a lot of other athletes not slip through the cracks in the healthcare system. Like I ended up being that guy that slipped through the cracks because I got hurt in high school. So it wasn't my athletic trainer in college's responsibility. It wasn't the school's responsibility to rehab me, financially. I go to a new doctor. And so it was kind of like everybody treated me as, oh, that's not my job. And I'm just like, man, this is Division I sports medicine. It's not my job. And so for me, it's, again, it was kind of a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, and I was just pissed off and, really angry and resentful and, bitter about, and again, and it's hard. And I see this with a lot of kids now too, which is, young kids that play a sport get their identity wrapped up in the sport. And at a certain point, we all have to face that you're not going to play anymore. And this game isn't going to be the same as it was in your, it's not going to be the same magnitude of time in your life. And I had a really hard time transitioning with that, even in college, and it's even harder for professional athletes. I know you could speak to this, but how do you go from this thing that was 50, 60 hours a week, every week, eat, sleep, drink, breathe it, and to grinding to a halt and not doing it anymore? It's really tough. And so, yeah, that was it, man. I just kind of went on this journey to find answers for me. And in doing so, I what I think stumbled upon some of the secret sauce that really helps athletes kind of take that step from injury to, thrive, or surviving to thriving, I guess,
Yeah. I will tell you touched on a couple of things that struck a chord with me. Identity crisis, 100%. I have been trying and struggling to figure out who the hell I am since I stopped playing professional lacrosse. I know that lacrosse is supposed to be part of my life. I know that, coaching lacrosse is supposed to be part of my life, and I'm supposed to be a father and a husband, and that's the real world. But I'm really struggling with it. I've actually thrown myself more into the Face-Off Academy and obsessing more about my athletes than I ever have to try to fill that void. And I'm lifting harder than I ever have, as if I'm going to play next weekend. The only difference is now I'm sore for a week rather than a day. And I totally understand that. At some point you get bitter because you're just like, I have more to give, when the reality is you don't. It's not there anymore. So you have to move on. And I love that you redirected that passion. And I can speak from experience. You completely helped me. I went out with a very sweet note at the end of my Major League Lacrosse career. I could barely walk when I saw you when the spring training started. And here I am at the end of the year. It was the third best statistical year I've ever had as a pro, as a 33 or 34-year-old, my final season. And that's all because you helped me do that. So, when you look at your passion in helping people, give us some of the details, because, Mike, you've been our athletic trainer at the National Showcase for 3 or 4 straight years now. You're going to do it again this December.
5 or 6 years, man.
Yeah, and there's a reason. And it's not just because we're boys. We're boys because we met and we respected each other on a professional level, and then we became friends. But I know for a fact, we had a kid blow a knee out one year, and he was in great hands. That kind of stuff will happen once in a while, and he was in great hands. He was taken care of, And I was fully aware of the fact that if you weren't there, I would not have felt as ease and comfortable about that kid getting to where he needed to be one day. And Tate is back to 100%, looking great all over again because of that. So, tell me some of the things that you have stumbled upon in your years as an athletic trainer, specifically for the face-off position that you're seeing with athletes, and things that you didn't realize before when you were playing that you realize now that can help them.
Oh, I mean, geez, when I was playing, like we talked about this, like face off was like, who could cheat the best, and like, what could you get away with? And it wasn't, like you really made it a reputable and scientific position, like a position. And again, something that can really impact games. I think, from an athletic training and sports medicine standpoint, there's a few things. I think today's kids, the younger generation, are maybe the most over specialized and underprepared physically generation that we've ever had. And I don't think it's because of lack of effort or knowledge. I think it's because of just lifestyle and how our lifestyles have changed so much, and I'm an 80s kid, born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s, and had, grew up with the technology, but it's like we went out and played lots of different sports. And, recess in middle school was playing freaking bumper tag and full effort sprinting across the field. And that was what we did for 45 minutes in the middle of the day, just for shits and giggles, just for fun. And I think today's kids, unless it's organized by a coach and it's a program, they don't do it. And their lifestyles outside of sport are generally very sedentary. And I think to a certain degree, lacrosse and maybe football are a little bit more resistant to that trend, because you can't replace the physicality of those sports. These are collision sports, so like the little finesse guy, can be effective in certain positions. Like, for example, like a guy like Chris Hogan, right? Can play in the NFL and can be a PLL player because he's just an incredible athlete. He's an athlete first, and you could say what you want about the skill set in lacrosse or whatever. It doesn't matter, but he can run with those guys in both sports. But you can't take Jose Altuve and put him on a lacrosse field and expect him to succeed. I mean, he's just undersized, and there's a certain aspect of that physicality that's present in lacrosse that I think you can't really fake that. And so I think lacrosse might be a little bit more, but like I work with a lot of baseball players too, and I see this a ton. Overuse, repetitive stress injuries. Kids are undernourished. Their nutrition sucks. They're not sleeping. They're overstressed because of the internet and like dealing with an online presence and having that kind of fake reality. And I, a lot of kids, man, I just see a ton of young athletes that struggle with anxiety and subclinical depression and just like not confident. And so like a lot of those things were shades of kind of the things that I dealt with as a college athlete, and so, I think there's that level to it. I think, on the physical side of stuff, I think there's this overemphasis on structure in the body versus movement. And this is a conversation you and I have had a lot, which is, guys get hurt for whatever reason. And, there's two real categories or lanes you can run down. It's like, okay, it's an acute collision injury like I had, like a lot of the injuries you've had, where it's like, okay, MRI, we're going to diagnose this. We want to see what kind of damage we're dealing with. We have a surgical procedure to reconstruct this injury, and now we can get you into a rehabilitative process. And that's pretty straightforward. And for better or worse, our healthcare system is pretty good at that. Where we run into a lot of issue is on the chronic stuff. And when guys have either less than optimal performance, where they have chronic injuries or pain that lasts more than, from like a bruise or like a strain or something like that. And they enter the same system, right? So guys like, man, I've got this knee pain. I don't know what caused it. It just started popping up on me and it won't go away. It won't go away. I've iced it. I've treated it. I've gone to the doctor. I've gotten injections. And so what ends up happening, we've got the MRI. We start to play the acute rules of healthcare for the chronic stuff. And we end up sending athletes down this rabbit hole where there's really no answer for them. And the analogy I like to use with athletes a lot is like, you can't look at a painting through a microscope, because you're going to miss a lot. And so what I mean by that is the more you zoom in on a body part or area, the more you miss right? So if you get an MRI in that chronic knee issue, that doctor is looking for a knee answer to your knee problem. And he's ignoring the fact that this knee operates in an environment in the rest of your body. And so like my perspective is, let's zoom out a little bit and let's be a little bit more like, let's assess everything. Let's look at all of your mobility prerequisites. Let's look at how you move dynamically, and let's see where the opportunities are. Let's look for high ROI strategies or high return on investment strategies. Man, your knee hurts, but your hip mobility sucks. Well, let's get you some hip mobility and see how that knee responds, because it's got to operate in that environment, right? If you ask your knee to do hip stuff, you're going to have a bad time. And a lot of athletes are struggling with that kind of stuff where they just start treating the knee. And here's an easy litmus test for those athletes listening. If you have a chronic injury in an area of your body and you treat that area for 2 weeks and it doesn't get better, guess what? It's not your problem. That's not your problem at all. You're just throwing, you're like spraying bullets at the wall trying to see if something's going to stick. And so what we need to do is really, like, you watch American Sniper. What do? They got 3 guys setting up that one shot, and we're going to aim at that specific target, and and we're going to hit a heart shot, and that's what we have to do with, I think, these chronic movement things, and be more proactive. A lot of times, even our doctors will do a physical, and it's like, I put a post about this week, and some people got pissed off, and I don't understand why, but like, let them be pissed.
Because everybody loves to be pissed off.
That's a fact. Is okay, great. You got to go get your pre-participation physical from your doctor, which I think, is valuable in some sense, but it's also a huge waste of time, because what does he do? He does your heart rate, your blood pressure. He measures your heart, your height and weight. You do the weird cough test if you're a guy. And then he signs off that you're ready to play. It's like, all he did was confirm that you're freaking alive. Yeah, that's it. You're alive today. Great. Awesome. How is that physical preparedness for sport? And you kind of blend this with this undertone of just kids being not the most robust humans.
Yeah.
They're just underprepared for sport. Like when you and I were kids, if you got cut from your high school lacrosse team, guess what you did that spring? You didn't play lacrosse. You got in the gym, worked out, you got to the cage and practiced when the team wasn't practicing, and you kind of like waited for your next shot. And now you just go to the next organization that'll have you. Somebody will have you if you're willing to play. And that's why
really.
And what we're seeing is participation in sports going down, but the injury rates are going up. And I think those statistics are not lying to us. It's showing us exactly this trend, this underpreparedness. But there's a lot, dude, I could go all day. There's so much stuff to unpack with that. But I think those are some of the general themes. I think mental preparedness is something that kids lack today because they're so worried about what everybody else thinks. I think physical preparedness is something that a lot of young athletes lack. And again, it's not for lack of effort, because you'll see kids, working on their skill set, but then there's just no energy left in the tank to be a good athlete. And, organizations like Face Off Academy, I think what you do so well, and I wish I saw this in more private academies, like, that have that depth of specificity, but you also put a high priority on just general athleticism and physical preparedness. And that's why your guys succeed. That's why they're the best at their position. It's really fun to be able to serve that community and give back some of what I know. And, it's awesome to hear that guys, like Tate, recover. And, again, one of my mantras is like, nobody slips through the cracks, not on my watch. It just won't happen. I can't, because I was that guy, you know what I mean? And it sucks to have no direction, but if at least I can give somebody a direction, then that's me feeling good about what I'm doing,
Yeah. And you and I, that's one of the things. It's funny. I remember I miss coming in and seeing you on a weekly basis, because not only would you work on me and I'd feel better when I left, but also you and I would have like a therapy session together and we would talk about all the shit that pisses us off. But one of the things that, you and I really connected on was the fact that we have this big brother mentality, right? And there was a quote, actually, I threw up on my Instagram yesterday. Somebody said, be the person that you needed when you were younger. And I feel like that's exactly what the FOA was started by. That's the idea and concept. Face Off Academy wasn't started because we were like, let's go make money teaching face-offs. We already had jobs. We wanted to do it because we were like, these kids are learning cheating and they're not as good as they could be. So let's have some fun during the summer. And because of what we did it out of passion, it became something that we were like, all right, I have to sell my old business because this is way more fun. But you and I had that, like, nobody slips through the cracks. When I'm doing a clinic and I see a kid with crazy potential, I'm already paid. The kid already paid his money. I don't get paid more for him leaving there better. But if he's doing one systemic thing wrong that he was taught somewhere else that I know is incorrect, it's like a needle in the back of my neck for an hour and a half, and I gotta fix it. I have to fix it.
I mean, again, that's what makes you special, Greg, and that's, you know, and that's why, in a sense, we're cut from the same cloth, because it comes from like a deeper, I don't want to say insecurity, I don't think that's the right word for it, but that itch that we had when we were younger, that need that we had when we were younger that didn't get filled, and it because it didn't exist. You know, and it's like, you look at, like, you know, even the Movement Underground and like this performance therapy model and attached to a strength and conditioning gym. It's like, that didn't exist 20 years ago. And the reason it didn't exist because there wasn't a utility for it yet. But now there's this overwhelming need. And, you know, and it's just, with healthcare costs rising, and, you know, I believe an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And it's exactly to that same theme that you're talking about. Is like, I will go that little extra mile to help that one kid because I've already been paid. They're here to get better. That's my job, to whatever carrot I have to play to get that athlete to take that next step. And all I can do is facilitate it. I can't do it for them. I tell parents this all the time. Listen, if I could do the reps for you and you get the benefit, I would do it, but I'd charge you a hell of a lot more. You know what I mean? But I can't. I can only show you and teach you what to do. And then you have to execute on that. But I think when people understand, and even to your point before, which was, you know, we'd have a full-on therapy session. And it's funny because we would talk about movement and kinesiology and strength and conditioning and rehab. And we'd also talk about philosophy and mental skills and, you know, coaching and teaching and all these other things that are just so synergistic. But it's when somebody understands their why, they can endure any what or any how. And I think our healthcare system is so stuck on the what and the how, that, okay, oh great, okay, you hurt your knee, this is what you got to do. Well, why did I hurt my knee? I need, you know, why? Because the why is what's going to get you the result. And that's going to be like, okay, I got to get these correctives in. I got to work on this hip mobility because this is negatively impacting my performance or my potential for the future. That's a whole subset different motivation than this is the program, do it. You know what I mean? It's like, just lacks context, you know?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And going back to your point about learning exactly what the problem is, we had at Penn State, Brad Pantal, our strength coach, he was big on Prehab. That Prehab was, we heard it every day. Every specific skill set position had a specific Prehab routine that we would go through. Face-off guys, a lot of it was based on shoulder Prehab. Because back then, as you know, face-offs, usually your knee down, and it's just grind, rotate, and your labrum just gets shredded. So, for you, when you and I came in, I've had back pain since I was a freshman in high school. L4, L5, L3, L4, fractures in my vertebrae. I just had Mitchell Lloyd, who is going to go to Maryland. He's one of the best face-off guys in the country. He's suffering right now from some low back issues as well, and he had just sent me an email yesterday. And the first time I went and saw you was when I was, 34, 35 years old. Yep. And I've had back pain since I was 15, 14 years old. And I had gotten so used to it that I forgot how much it hurt. And the first time in my whole life that anybody said, maybe it's your hips, was you. You grabbed my hip, you internally rotated my hip, and you go, dude, you have no movement here at all. No one ever said that to me. Instead, it was all, I had a trainer in high school. He's like, oh, well, maybe your hamstrings are tight. I'm like, dog, I can put my palms on the ground. Like, what do you want me to do? Be able to kiss my own ass cheek? Like, how flexible do I need to be for you to not think it's that? Like, you're right. Everyone's, oh, just take it, let's throw something on a dartboard. Let's figure it out. And you actually put me through some mobility, and you were like, here is the issue. Greg, guess what? It's not one thing. It is a combination of these things, and we're going to work on them all. And I was able to play. And, so my next point, because as you know, in the face-off world, They change the rules every 2 years. The most recent addition was we're going to go to standing neutral grip only, okay, which is great. I actually am a proponent of that. I think it is safer, it's way less impact, and I think the kids will be able to play longer. And I say this as a, if you and if a kid came in and said, I want to take knee down reps with you, coach, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to last 3 face-offs, and then I need to go in the corner and cry because my shoulder and back are going to hurt. But I could take hours of standing neutral grip face-offs. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned my boy Mitch. He was asking if it's the stance, because some coaches are he said that his doctor was like, oh, I'm seeing more of these lower lumbar issues now than I've ever seen. And they said, well, maybe now because we can't be on a knee, we got to be standing. Is that the case? And I was like, I don't believe that at all, because I think it's way less about the position you're in and way more about the repetitive nature of you guys overusing and taking 100,000 reps a week rather than just working on technique. So you tell me, from a standing neutral grip to right knee down stance, with face-offs being more of a rotational 50-50 grind for 30 to 40 seconds, as opposed to standing neutral grip where the face-off's over in 2 seconds and the ball comes out, is it the stance or is it the repetitive nature?
Listen, I think you kind of already touched on a few of the things there, which is it's a multi-varied equation, which means there is no one answer there. It's going to be a combination of stuff. So the first thing, we went from, knee down to grinding it out, basically like a scrum in rugby, yep, to basically a sprinter stance in track and field. That's essentially the fundamental change. And if you look at the incidences of low back pain in sprinters, and you don't see it a ton, it's there, but it's not one of the higher incidences of injuries that track athletes suffer from. I think it's really two things. It comes down to the movement prerequisites is, do you possess the mobility in the right areas to assume that shape effectively and efficiently? And if you don't, you will compensate to get the job done. And so we're looking at these guys in standing neutral grip, and what they are essentially in is a deep hip hinge. And when you hip hinge like that and your spine is basically level to the ground, you're subjecting the vertebrae to more shearing force, right? Gravity is pulling down there. There's a reason when we're upright, gravity, we have our spine is stacked up. There's some mechanical stability that's inherent to that system. As human beings, we are already predisposed to neck and low back issues, because unlike other animals on the planet, every other vertebrate on the planet has basically one curve to their spine. It's usually a flexion curve, a single curve. We have 3 curves, and this is a byproduct of being, again, I'm not getting into like the evolution conversation or religion.
Okay, we believe in evolution on this show.
Okay, great. We're up right now, so if we were just to have a single curve, we'd be chasing our faces all the time. So we need these curves in order to maintain a good center of mass. But what it does is it predisposes us to spine type stuff, disc injuries, these kinds of things. My perspective would be to screen hip mobility, to screen motor control or spine control, right? And so the other part, like even to what you were saying about your case, is like flexibility is a horrible, horrible biometric for injury prevention. It's just, I mean, the research is out. It's not my opinion. It's the data, the data has been suggesting this for decades, and somehow, but the fitness community and the health community loves this idea of stretching as a fix-all because it's easy, and it's easy to do. It's like, oh, just do these couple of hamstring stretches, it's like, oh, that should fix it right up. It's like, okay, yeah, I'll wait for that to happen. It's a combination of things, like your case was, right? But like, this is the stuff that pisses me off, man. It's like, and it's like, let me just stretch everything and that'll make it better. It's like, well, one of the biggest keys for me, I think, in the way that I've changed the way I practice is I really look at the nervous system a lot now. I look at, we're human beings, we're just infinitely complex organisms, and it's impossible to look at somebody's biomechanics, I think now. And again, I love biomechanics. That I'm a biomechanics super geek, but there's this element of neurological capacity, or how well does the software run the hardware? And so there's a couple of things when you talk about low back pain. First is the pain conversation. Just like stretching, pain is a really crappy biomarker for what's wrong with you. It's basically more akin to like a smoke detector in your house. It's the smoke detector doesn't go off when you light the fire. It goes off when the room fills with smoke. So it's a delayed mechanism. It's not very accurate. And the other part of it is it's context specific. So I could put you in a standing neutral grip stance and you might have low back pain, but I could also then lay you on your back and put you in a same position and you will not have pain. Well, why is that the case? It's the same position. It's just a different orientation of that position. And it's because pain is more of a threat meter than it is a damage meter, right? We know this. So everybody knows this, right? You get a paper cut, that shit hurts like hell, but that's not a lot of tissue damage. In fact, it's very little tissue damage. Why does it hurt so much? Well, it's your brain's interpretation of threat. And when you have, to your point, repetitive trauma or repetitive stress in a singular position, right? It's the context of that position that starts to become painful, not the actual stress on the body. Here's an example of that. Chinese water torture, right? You ever hear of this? Or you lay on a board and they drop a drip of water on your head for a day? Yeah. Well, guess what? You're not doing any damage to your head, right? It's a drop of fucking water. But give it 6 hours and you're going to want to, you'd rather die. You'd rather die. It's so painful. It's not damage, it's threat. It's your brain's experience of threat. And what we know from, again, and this is not stuff we talked about when you and I were younger, even in the healthcare community, because we had no way to quantify it or measure it. But now we have all these amazing technologies. We can look at functional MRI and look at how blood is distributed throughout the brain, indicating which brain regions are more active. And anxiety and chronic pain are virtually the same neurochemical signature. And so we start to have these athletes with all these other lifestyle issues, right? You know, they're stressed out. They're worried about what their freaking TikTok followers are doing. They're worried about, you know, how people perceive them in the world. They're worried about, you know, getting that scholarship. They're worried about all these things that they have to do. And then being and they're physically underprepared. Man, it's the perfect storm for chronic depression, chronic anxiety, and chronic pain. And that's what we see. So I don't think it's the position. I don't think it's the change. I think what you're seeing is a lot of athletes going through that adaptation period, you know? So listen, man, our bodies are compensation machines. We're the dominant species on this planet because we adapt better than any other organism. It doesn't take us generations. We can adapt in a single lifetime, you know, and then we can get into like epigenetics and all this crazy stuff, but our bodies will adapt to what we are doing the most. And so you take a kid that sits all day in school and then has to go out and practice face-offs and then go to lacrosse practice. They're doing 8 hours of nothing followed by, you know, a few hours of a lot. And so I think what we're just having is a mismatch of adaptations. And you're going to see a lot of these athletes that have really relied on the knee down moto grip style. That's what they've adapted to. Have to go through that learning curve of teaching their body to own those positions. But my perspective would be, I would screen not just core strength, but how well do they segment their spine, right? Our spine is multiple segments. And so what I see a lot with athletes is they'll instead of having good intervertebral mobility and control where every segment moves a little bit and then all together they move a lot of it, we'll see this idea of hinge points where, and this was the case for you, which is you chunk a bunch of vertebrae together and you hinge at one level repeatedly. So it's kind of like taking a credit card and going flexion, extension. Like what's going to happen at that level? Eventually it's going to start to weaken.
Yeah.
You know, and you take an athlete like you, it's like, dude, like your lumbar paraspinals are like my fucking water bottle, man. They were just these gigantic, strong, like thick, dense muscles. And I look at that and say, he uses this a lot. Why? Because like what happens when you train your biceps a lot? They grow, right? It's hypertrophy. You have a lot of hypertrophy around your back because that was your hip extension strategy. And we could look at your back all we want, but we had to look at it through the lens of, okay, let's see what your upper back and your hips do, the surrounding joints. And you had some limitations there. It's like, okay, let's get some T-spine mobility. Let's work on getting those hips moving a little bit better and see how that affects your lower back. And all we did was put your lower back in a better environment. We put it in where it didn't have to do so much, and it can be that bend but not break scenario versus, you know, a situation where you're relying on that singular structure to handle all that load for decades. And so again, this is the problem with kids. They're sedentary, they're sitting all day, they don't move a lot outside organized sport, and when they do move, it's over specified. And so it's the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, and that's what we're seeing is this like perfect storm of all these different variables. But sorry, that was a little long-winded, but
dude, everything you just said is incredibly valuable. And in fact, as you were talking, I was like, shit, we're going to have Mike on for every season that we do. We're just going to talk about a different thing each time because this is really valuable stuff. I think,
I love it, yeah.
When you look at what you were just talking about, like, for me, my biggest regret in my whole life, and there's nothing I could do to fix it, it's just no one ever talked to me about T-spine mobility. No one ever mentioned thoracic spine to me until I got into kinesiology, Kines 101 in college, and I just knew it was a part of the body.
Right.
It never occurred to me till we met that if my thoracic spine is immobile, then that means my lumbar spine is going to have to take all the brunt of everything.
It's going to have to move more.
Yeah, and I remember my back hurt me all the way through till I was done with the PLL. And I remember during the pandemic, all of 2020, I dedicated every night to an hour of thoracic spine mobility. And then it became my pre-workout regimen. My back feels better now at the age of 37 than it has since I was 13 years old. And it's not a coincidence. Adductors, internal rotation of my hips, and then also working on my thoracic spine, and I feel amazing now. Right. And that's the key. So I want to leave with one thing, because this ACL injuries are so prevalent, and they're becoming more prevalent amongst athletes. We can get into that for hours and hours, but what I want to go through is I'm an athlete, I'm a face-off man or whatever, and I just hurt my ACL. I'm about to have surgery. Mike, just give me some steps that I'm going to go through so that I can have some peace of mind and know what's on the other side of this tunnel.
Yeah, so you and I have both been through this tunnel, and we both had a similar experience. And one of the biggest things that I do now with my athletes, and this is exactly what I did with the guys at the FOA over the years who have had a couple injuries here and there, which is immediately try to frame a positive mindset around this, because it's just, I know it sounds hippie and kind of like a little bit like meta, but mindset, the way you think affects how you feel, period. And I try to frame this idea that an injury is an unfortunate opportunity to learn something about your body, to start to address the underlying reasons for why you ended up in that injury to begin with. And if you can get through that process, you will not only be a better athlete coming out of it, but a better human being. We need adversity, man. We need humans, like we're meant to carry a load. And sometimes, like for me, it took me getting seriously hurt multiple times to really learn that lesson and to kind of shape how I treat and how I act as a clinician today. But here's the process: is you have that knee event, and every athlete knows, okay, this is not just I tweaked this is bad. Like I can't move it. It's extremely painful in a lot of cases. My experience was I don't even remember being in pain. It was the first real catastrophic injury that I'd ever had. So I was kind of just in shock. And so some athletes don't even really experience the pain so much, because again, pain is context wise. When your brain has no experience with that level of trauma, there's almost no way for it to respond, And so it's weird. It's different for everybody. It's just one of those conundrums that we run into. But the first thing you need to do is start to manage that swelling while you're going through that diagnostic process. The diagnostic process is going to be, got to get to the doctor to get the MRI. This is just the system that we have. You have again, I sent whoever, our athletes to just the city MD to get the x-ray and to get the script for the MRI, just to get it knocked out of the way. You don't necessarily have to go to an orthopedic specialist for that. You can go to your general doctor to get that imaging done. Then you have to take it to the orthopedic surgeon, and they have to confirm or deny what the extent of that damage is and whether or not it needs surgical correction. More often than not, you're going to need, if you're an athlete and you have a torn ACL, it's going to require a, surgical reconstruction. But one of the things, here's some of the stuff that I'm going to tell you that's not mainstream and is not being taught. I would not ice that injury at all. Maybe in the first 20 minutes after trauma, if a kid's really in a lot of pain, for pain mitigation, because you can numb that thing up. But ice is the biggest myth in sports medicine history. In fact, the physician who coined the term RICE, rest, ice, compression, elevation, he coined that term in his book in 1968 or 9. In 2013, he apologized to the medical community and rescinded his statements based on the lack of credible evidence. And I actually wrote a 6-hour course for clinicians on a better or more modern approach to treating acute injuries, swelling, post-surgical trauma. The best thing to do is get it elevated and move in some level, so I'm doing a lot of blood flow restriction therapy with my athletes now, contralateral training or training the other side. Lymphatic drainage massage is just a huge underutilized tool for managing swelling and acute trauma, where I can physically manipulate your lymphatic system and drain that swelling out with very, very little pressure. And it's highly effective, and we can get range of motion back really quickly. So one of the things, so then, okay, fine. We deal with it. Most athletes will, and I recommend doing at least a month of what you said, like that prehab. Get the swelling out, get your range of motion back, get that leg as strong as humanly possible in that 4 to 6 weeks, then have the surgery. Now, again, it's different for every athlete, depending on the time of year when you want to time this thing. An actual ACL recovery is 9 to 12 months. When I was going through it and you were going through it, the number was 6 months. And I played my first Division I lacrosse game against Lehigh 7 months post-operatively, and it was the worst decision I ever made because I was like, just hobbled, man. It was just like, it was just, and I was facing off because that's how I could, contribute to the team, but I just wasn't effective, man. I was just out there just to get the clamp basically. And so do the prehab, get your knee, get your leg strong, get your movement assessed, especially if it was a non-contact injury. If it was a collision injury, man, that's bad luck sometimes, and that shit happens. And that's why guys like me have a job. But if it's a non-contact ACL, there is something in your biomechanics that caused you to use your knee to do a rotational movement that's not necessarily designed to do it that way. The knee does rotate a little bit, but it's not meant to be a hip or an ankle, and so you got to get those underlying issues checked off, because even if you have the knee reconstructed, you'll likely end up in the same scenario if you don't address those underlying issues. And the inherent flaw to our healthcare system is they're just going to reconstruct the knee. And if you go to insurance-based PT, they're going to follow the playbook exactly to the T, because that's what the insurance will pay for. Unfortunately, it's just the system that we have, for better or worse. It's what.
All right, we can have an entire.
We could do 40. We could do an hour just on that, but. You just have to know, but it's just like any other game. If you know the rules really well, you can play the game in your favor. And my whole thing is, what I did with your guys is give those parents and that kid the cheat codes to the game, how to get through this system the best and the most efficient way possible to get what you need out of it. But understand that there's always more you can do. The mistake I made was I took the first answer everybody gave me, and I executed on that answer 110%. But if the answer isn't the right answer, even if you execute 110%, you're not going to hit your mark. So you have to have that level of specificity to each athlete to really get them the best possible outcome on that long-term outcome. Mm-hmm. Then you have your surgery, and it's back to damage control mode, because that surgery is a massive amount of trauma. It's a long process because they're reconstructing that ligament with a tendon, and there takes some time for that tendon to adapt and specialize. And then usually at around 3 or 4 months is when you can start the process of being an athlete again, starting to run, starting to, get into the frontal plane or side to side movements a little bit more. But usually for me, my athletes, by 6 weeks out, they should have full range of motion. They should have very little swelling, and their rehab looks like a strength and conditioning program with some minor modifications. They're not doing anything plyometric or explosive. They're not doing lateral side-to-side movements or rotational movements yet, but we can train that sagittal plane, which is front and back movements, real hard. And I try to get guys going as soon as possible. I think the new trend is blood flow restriction. Maybe we could talk about that another day, because the science on occlusion therapy, which the 30,000 foot view is, I put these tourniquet cuffs around your limbs, and I trick your nervous system, right? Because your brain starts to think there's a drop in blood pressure. So we're getting arterial flow into the limb, slowing down that venous return. The brain interprets this as a loss of blood pressure, so it increases cardiac output and dumps growth hormone into the system. And so we can take it. So now what we can do is get the same effects as high load 90% 1RM training with 10% of your 1RM. So in a rehab scenario, man, that's like the ultimate cheat code. You know what I mean? Because I can maintain your size, I can maintain your strength without even loading that leg beyond body weight or a 5-pound freaking cuff weight. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of stuff we can do, but you're not going to get that in the standard operating procedure. You're not going to get that at your big box PT clinic because it's too specified and you can't scale that. So they're just going to give you ice and stim, ultrasound, all these bullshit passive modalities. You're going to do straight leg raises and Jane Fondas until you're 4 months out. And then your insurance is going to cut you off and you're going to end up like me, underprepared to return to sports. And so I think that's why you're seeing places like my place popping up all over the country, kind of like these halfway houses where we actually can help athletes turn that corner. But it's a tough process, but if you attack it right, you know, a lot of guys come out of it doing extremely well. The surgical procedures that they can do now are just incredible. You know, minimizing the amount of trauma. I mean, again, you and I both had open knee surgeries, and a lot of this is being done arthroscopically now, which is a total game changer. You know, so not to discredit what the surgeons are doing, but the last thing I'll say is consider this. A lot of athletes will fly all over the freaking country to find that specialist to do their surgery and work on them for 45 minutes while they're fucking unconscious, and then go to the closest PT place to their house for the next 9 months. It's like, take the same level of vetting and time and research and find a provider who can help you walk down that path. So preferably somebody who's been there. Not to say that, you know, you have to have a torn ACL in your athletic career to be a good at rehabbing them, but somebody who walks the walk and not just, you know, went to school and has a degree hanging up. Because while that's important and necessary, you don't know what their continuing education is or what ask them what their philosophy is. What's your plan for me? And if it's not, and if they can't give you the short and long-term goals, go to the next place and just keep finding until you get that right answer.
That's great advice, because I've always said the same thing. I've said, you know, surgery, ACL surgery at this point is pretty straightforward. It's pretty frequent. Everybody does it. I can almost go to WebMD and do it myself at this point. But physical therapy is where you're going to spend most of your time. And if you do that, if you tack that correctly, then that's where you're going to find out if you're going to have an athletic career on the other side of this. One that's not only that you can get back to where you were, but like you and I always used to say, we want you better. We want a better version of you after this, because then we don't have to do this again. You do it right, you don't have to do it again.
And you learn a ton. And you learn a ton about yourself along the way, which, man, I don't know if it's hard. It's like, what's more valuable? But I would say the lessons, man. It's like life's teaching you a lesson. I know it sounds like ultra philosophical, but you're here for a reason. And take it as an opportunity. Look at it through the lens of life is teaching me something right now, and take the freaking lesson. Yeah. You know, listen, learn, dedicate yourself. It's not easy. It's painful. It sucks. But man, that's how you turn coals into diamonds, man. Pressure, time, consistency, all of those things. And a lot of times you'll see the right athletes. There's two athletes that go into that. The guy that uses it as an excuse for why they never made it, and the guy that uses it as fuel on the fire. And unfortunately for me, I was the guy that used it as an excuse. But the way that I reconcile that now is, I hope that I've learned so much through that process that I'm savagely good at teaching this to young athletes so that they don't end up being that guy too. And so that's the only thing I can do now to reconcile that mistake I made when I was 18 years old, which is a forgivable mistake for an 18-year-old to make. Yeah. But it's like just my personal philosophy that I'm just not going to let that happen, or at least to the extent that I can do that. Because you also can't beat yourself up for the kids or the athletes that just don't want to do the work. It's like, at the end of the day, that's not on me anymore, you know?
Amen.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you a lot, man. Like I said, we're going to be doing this pretty much every season. You have so much knowledge that these athletes can take home. So I appreciate you being on here. For the regular subscribers, we are going to cut it off here. For the premium subscribers, we're going to be back with the post game with Mike, talking about some stuff that I know is really close to his heart. So, Mike, I want to thank you very much for making it official, brother.
Thank you so much, man. Great to be here, and it's great to catch up.